Alright, I don't want to keep you in suspense. You've made your choices and submitted your instructions to the crew. Don't worry, they know what they're doing. They were just as excited about this shot as you are. Now, let's hear the results from the people who work in the trenches. After all is said and done, you should trust them to let you know how effective your decisions were. Let's start with Miguel. He's our lead animator, sometimes the only animator. He had the task of working with the previous supervisor and hammering out a working VFX pre-visualization clip. The point of pre-visualization is to test our ideas before we get started to see if they can work. It's the movie before the movie, using rough models, textures, and photos to approximate what the shot will look like. And this isn't an ordinary previs cut either. In addition to roughly outlining the motions and positions of key elements, a VFX previs also simulates the intended visual effects for those elements. The key is accuracy. Miguel took detailed measurements of what we knew about our shot and used those to figure out what we didn't yet know. We already knew how much green and blue screen material we had to work with. We knew the height of the actresses and the dimensions of the floorboard panels. We needed full coverage behind all actors and equipment, but we didn't know if what we had was enough through the entire camera motion. We also needed to see if we could recreate the lighting of shooting day. We wanted to make the shoot outdoors to get lighting for free. A dawn or cloudy day shoot would give us soft shadows and even lighting. It was too late in the production to schedule an indoor studio, plus the late production time was putting more of a strain on the studio's already stretched budget. So Miguel went to the proposed site of the shoot, an outdoor basketball court, and did a complete survey of the area. He took photos and created a panorama of the site. He made notes of the sun angle at sunrise and how shadows fell across the basketball court. He brought all this data back and built a virtual basketball court in 3D software. Miguel then built virtual models of all the equipment that we were planning on using for the shot, including the frames that hold the colored screens, the camera dolly and track, the wooden platform that the talent rides on, the floorboards, and the colored partition that blocks the platform from view until the right moment. Miguel then took some practice footage of our actresses as they were roughing out the movements and getting the timing right. Miguel made some crude 3D models of the actresses and roughly matched their movements, and inserted them into his virtual set. He then worked out the camera movement along the dolly track. He and the director found a good angle and good timing for all the movements. From here, the crew was able to figure out what we still needed. As it turned out, we still needed to arrange more colored material to cover everybody for the entire shot. We were able to figure out how many floor panels to buy, how much shade we were going to need, and how big to make our platform partition for hiding the rolling platform. We took it a step further and used this previs render to test our ideas of how to create the effects. We took the render and put it through our chroma keyer, checking to see how the matte might look. We analyzed the virtual camera's motion with MatchMove software and produced a new camera for it in our 3D software. Miguel added crude buildings to render separately, along with a few holographic elements, to see how they looked and where to place them. Finally, Christy went through and composited all the virtual passes to see if anything was missing. When we were satisfied that the plan was sound, we used the virtual set that Miguel built to print schematics for the film crew. From this, they laid out the dolly track, frames, partitions, and floorboards. They knew just how far to place the camera from the talent and where to place tracking markers. As you learned earlier, two different film crews competed on this shot because each were new startups and wanted their names in the credits. A film like Soccer Mom was important for both companies to help increase their clientele, so both companies agreed to compete for the shot. We had someone from Sweet and Dill on each shoot to make sure the previs was being used correctly. One company used our green backdrop, while the other opted for blue. Miguel went along both shoots to verify that the measurements were being followed and to check the light angles. Leah, our lighter, also went along to take HDRI exposures. Once both shots were in the can, the studio picked the best clips and sent them over to us. The director was fine with whichever take we chose, so I left it up to you. You chose the green take and had Max go ahead and do the match move, while Christy worked on painting out the green markers and started the chroma key work. Max first created a lower resolution copy of the footage and ran it through the match move software. The software automatically searched for features in the footage and tracked them through the entire shot. The software was able to lock in on the tracking markers that we placed on the green screen and hung from a wire in the foreground. Really, the markers turned out to be mostly unnecessary for the track because there were already plenty of features to track on the ground and in the set. Max ran the camera solution from the featured tracks, enabling the computer to simulate a new camera that could be exported to a 3D animation package. The tricky part, Max tells me, was in setting the coordinate system correctly to match the size of the set in the 3D scene. Max had to go back and take many of Miguel's survey notes from the shoot. He was able to find certain features that the software tracked and input the correct measurements between those features. He had to specify which tracking features rested on the ground. He had to mask off areas where there were people and equipment moving through the shot so that the match move software would ignore those motions. Finally, he found tracked corners of objects and told the computer how far apart they were in real space. For example, the corners of the floorboards were 8 feet apart, the frame was 8 feet high, and so on. This helped immeasurably because the 3D scene models had already been built to real scale. When all the tracking was done, the camera exported accurately and matched the real camera motion perfectly. While Max worked on the match moving, Christy began pulling the chroma key from the green footage. She had a few choice words to say about the white tracking markers. She had to spend about 12 hours painting out all those markers. And it was especially difficult to paint out the ones that fell behind actresses and equipment. Once that was done, Christy began a comprehensive 2-part removal process. The first part was to establish a hard edge key, where the main shapes are solid, but many of the fine details are lost. The second part was a softer key, where outlines contain much more detail, but some areas of color still show up a bit. She combined these two mats into a clean hybrid that had crisp edges in most places, but softer details were needed. While Max was finishing his roto work on the footage, Christy and Miguel began animation work that made up the many graphical displays and holograms that were present throughout the production. Christy did the 2D motion graphics, while Miguel animated the holographic shapes. Before you took over the management of this shot, the previous supervisor had our 3D guy, Isaac, build the 3D models of our scene and texture them. This included 15 building designs for the far background, a closer mid-ground building to show greater depth, a complex platform landing in the foreground that our actresses appear to be standing on, and a floating tram that our actress appears to ride. Isaac also built various shapes for mapping holographic images and animations onto. Miguel did the animation work for the floating tram and made it appear that our actress was riding on it. He didn't have access to any object tracking software, so he had to work out the animation by hand. Luckily, the motion of the camera was locked off at the point where the tram comes floating into the scene. Even so, the motion of the real tram was tricky. Miguel had the challenge of bringing in a 3D tram that floats in from screen left, slides in behind Casey, allows her to climb onto it, and float away with her on it. The real asset was a little cart with wheels on it that was pulled into the shot with colored weed trimmer line. The cart was pulled in at the right moment from behind a colored partition near the right side of the bench. The tram was concealed until a crew hand could pull the tram out from hiding and let the actress board it. The crew hand could then pull the cart with Casey all the way out of the shot. Leah and Miguel scouted for good locations to shoot footage for our storefront for the Telecorp building. The director wanted more elements from real life to help sell the illusion. The footage would be mapped onto one of the walls of the building to simulate a real storefront. To simplify matters, Miguel went out at night and shot footage of different storefronts with people in the windows. The night shooting helped eliminate reflections from the outside. It was actually more difficult than it may seem to get 42 seconds of footage in a parking lot without a car passing in front of the camera. Continuing the use of live-action elements to add realism to our shot, the crew began work on the distant trams. The director wanted other trams to be present in the background, each with a person riding their own tram, like Casey was in the foreground. Christy and Max set up a makeshift green screen set to shoot footage of themselves. They got Leah out there to help too. They each stood for several seconds and shifted around like they were riding the trams. Christy got the footage and keyed out the green. It didn't have to be too fancy. The images were to be viewed from a distance. They were composited onto polygons and copies of the 3D trams. They were animated by Miguel to crisscross along the background and provide depth and size cues. Christy even videotaped close-up footage of herself, acting like she was speaking to the camera. That footage was later used as an actress wrist phone image. Christy was the other person who appeared to be talking to the actress on it. Leah worked through the lighting simulations and rendered all geometry. This took quite a while. She took your choices for global illumination and shadow type, and rendered dozens of passes. She produced diffuse, specular, shadow, reflection, and occlusion passes for the railings, the recycler, the tram, the service pads, the telecork building, and the distant trams. To simulate the lighting, she took note of Miguel's light angle notes from the video shoot and added a distant light to simulate it. She used her light probe exposures and created an HDRI image to simulate the bounce light in the scene. The result in choosing the green take was that we had to deal with small problems with the green screen. One problem was an ugly, uneven shape that crossed into the pavement at the wrong place. There was supposed to be a railing here, but the shape would have been distracting. The green partition from the original shoot had brackets that stuck into the shot, causing the irregular shapes. To correct this, Christy had to think outside the box. Instead of trying to paint out the shapes by hand, frame by frame, she came up with a clever idea to fill the holes with 3D geometry that was textured to match the asphalt around the holes. With Isaac's help, Christy selected a large square of the image from frame 1 and imported that into an art program. She then stretched the image to form a regular rectangle for mapping. Isaac mapped the image onto a matching rectangular polygon and used old match move data to create a new camera for the 3D scene. They rendered out a new image sequence and then brought that into the editing software. Laying the new sequence behind the live-action video, the holes were filled with a new polygon element. The results were quite effective. You have to look very closely to see the deception. Overall, the director was pleased with our work. We were able to pull off his artistic vision, and your choices made that possible. Not only did Sweet and Dill Pixels provide deliverables on time and under budget, but we also helped keep our reputation for quality intact. I think you did yourself proud as visual effects supervisor. There's definitely a future for you here with the company. But we'll talk about that later. Right now, I need you to report bright and early tomorrow. We've got a meeting to talk about a bid for a new movie, and I want you there as our new visual effects supervisor.